Well, not since World War II has an American president addressed the nation about two important war zones at the same time. While he was leading the United States to winning World War II, Franklin Delano Roosevelt had to publicly address a war in Europe against Nazi Germany and a war in the Pacific against Germany's ally, Japan. Tonight, President Biden said, "We are at an inflection point in history that will determine the future for decades to come."
On the 7th of October, more than 1,300 people slaughtered in Israel, including at least 32 American citizens. Scores of innocents, from infants to the elderly grandparents, Israelis, Americans taken hostage. As I told the families of Americans being held captive by Hamas, we're pursuing every avenue to bring their loved ones home. As president, there is no higher priority for me than the safety of Americans held hostage. The terrorist group Hamas unleashed pure, unadulterated evil in the world. But sadly, the Jewish people know perhaps better than anyone that there is no limit to the depravity of people when they want to inflict pain on others. In Israel, I saw people who are strong, determined, resilient, and also angry, in shock and in deep, deep pain. I also spoke with President Abbas, the Palestinian Authority, and reiterated the United States remains committed to the Palestinian people's right to dignity and to self-determination. The actions of Hamas terrorists don't take that right away. Like so many other, I'm heartbroken by the tragic loss of Palestinian life, including the explosion at the hospital in Gaza, which was not done by the Israelis. We mourn every innocent life lost. We can't ignore the humanity of innocent Palestinians who only want to live in peace and have an opportunity. You know, the assault on Israel echoes nearly 20 months of war, tragedy, and brutality inflicted on the people of Ukraine, people that were very badly hurt since Putin launched his all-out invasion. We've not forgotten the mass graves, the bodies found bearing signs of torture, rape used as a weapon by the Russians, and thousands of Ukrainian children forcibly taken into Russia, stolen from their parents. It's sick. Hamas and Putin represent different threats, but they share this in common. They both want to completely annihilate a neighboring democracy, completely annihilate it. Hamas' stated purpose for existing is the destruction of the state of Israel and the murder of Jewish people. Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. Hamas uses Palestinian civilians as human shields, and innocent Palestinian families are suffering greatly because of them. Meanwhile, Putin denies Ukraine has or ever had real statehood. He claims the Soviet Union created Ukraine. And just 2 weeks ago, he told the world that if the United States and our allies withdraw, and if the United States withdraw, our allies will as well, military support for Ukraine would have, quote, a week left to live, but we're not withdrawing. You know, history has taught us that when terrorists don't pay a price for their terror, when dictators don't pay a price for their aggression, they cause more chaos and death and more destruction. They keep going, and the cost and the threats to America and the world keep rising.
The president said it is time for Congress to act.
Tomorrow, I'm going to send to Congress an urgent budget request to fund America's national security needs, to support our critical partners, including Israel and Ukraine. It's a smart investment that's going to pay dividends for American security for generations. Help us keep American troops out of harm's way. Help us build a world that is safer, more peaceful, more prosperous for our children and grandchildren.
Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Daniel Goldman of New York. He was in Israel with his family on October 7th when Hamas attacked. Congressman, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And I want to go back to that moment on October 7th when you were there, and at times with in Tel Aviv, the sheltering in the hotel and the stairwell with the sirens going off, and where we are tonight with the way the president responded.
It was such a clear and definitive, powerful speech from President Biden, who has been just an incredible leader over the last 11 days. And I think he laid out in such clear terms both the rationale and the reason why we must support Israel against a terrorist organization, Hamas, not against the Palestinian people, but against Hamas, which is also bad for the Palestinian people and has kept the Palestinian people from advancing into prosperity in Gaza in large part, and with Ukraine, and that these are unified threats against democracy by authoritarianism or terrorism, and that we, as the beacon of democracy in the United States, must be there to support our democratic allies. And I thought one of the better things he said was, this is actually an inexpensive way of doing it, because if we can stem these advances by the enemy, then we will stop them in their full stop. If not, they will continue to go forward, which will not only jeopardize our national security, but will be a lot more costly.
We heard the president say he's coming to Congress tomorrow, asking for appropriations, asking for aid to Ukraine and to Israel. That will be a request he makes to a dysfunctional House of Representatives.
And I hope it's a catalyst, Lawrence, because I would expect Senator Schumer, Leader Schumer, to bring that up immediately in the Senate, pass it, preferably with strong bipartisan support, based on the persuasive case that President Biden made tonight. And then they will send it over to the House. And then the House Republicans will have to have a reckoning. Are they going to let this essential aid to our Democratic allies around the world just linger there and lapse while they have their petulant infighting and keep the House from being open? And just remember, Lawrence, we Democrats are eager to work in a bipartisan way to not only pass this bill that's forthcoming, but other essential bills, including keeping our government open. But we Democrats cannot do it alone. We need Republican cooperation. They are in the majority, and we just sit here waiting, hoping that they can work across the aisle so that we can get this work done.
President Biden worked hard with Israel, with Egypt, to try to get humanitarian aid flowing. It has not crossed the Egyptian border yet into Gaza. They are still working out all of the checks that it has to go through to make sure there are no weapons on those first 20 trucks that they're going to be sending through there possibly tomorrow. That aid, the president says, is absolutely necessary for the people of Gaza, with whom he says he has complete sympathy.
Yes, it is. And the other thing he mentioned tonight, which I think is very important, is that it is a test case. This aid is intended for the Palestinian civilians who have been uprooted because of Hamas's attack on Israel and the ensuing response that Israel used in defense of itself. But Hamas has actually stolen humanitarian aid from a UN site earlier this week that was intended for Palestinian citizens. And I thought what President Biden said was very important. If this aid does go to the Palestinian civilians, then there will be a lot more aid coming. But if Hamas once again takes advantage of the civilians in Gaza and uses that aid for themselves, as they have done with billions of dollars to fund their terror network, then we will have to reassess what we can do with the humanitarian aid. It is on Hamas to make sure that that aid gets to the civilians who have been uprooted, who, by the way, Hamas uses as human shields and has prevented, in some cases, from evacuating the war zone.
Going forward, what do you expect of Israel in terms of following the laws of war, as President Biden has been talking about them, and their own expressed concern that many of them have for the humanitarian concerns of the Palestinians?
Well, I would expect Israel to continue doing what it has been doing, which is to send text messages, leaflets, make phone calls, videos, warning Palestinian civilians of ensuing attacks, and in one case, of course, urging them to evacuate from the north to the south, because Israel has made it clear as well it does not want innocent Palestinian lives to be lost. but Hamas is an enemy that must be taken care of. And one of the best examples of why this is so important is what happened with that hospital, where the media jumped to believe the propagandist Hamas terrorist organization that Israel bombed it. And it ultimately proved convincingly not to be the case, that it was a rocket from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, a sister organization of Hamas, that malfunctioned and landed on the hospital. This is the type of thing that gives Israel a double standard and a bad name, even though they did not do anything. And so Israel knows that it must abide by the laws of armed conflict, as it has been doing, and as President Biden has urged it to continue to do.
Congressman Dan Goldman, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And joining our discussion now is Democratic Senator Jackie Rosen of Nevada. She's a member of the Armed Services Committee and was in Israel last weekend as part of a bipartisan Senate delegation led by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. Senator Rosen, thank you very much for joining us. Been eager to talk to you since you got back from Israel. What did you see there that informs your approach to this crisis now?
Well, Lawrence, thank you for having me. I will tell you that we spent a very intense day in Israel meeting with the War Cabinet, meeting with President Herzog, Prime Minister Netanyahu, meeting with the families whose loved ones are taken hostage. What we felt when we met with them, those 203 estimated to be hostages taken brutally, savagely, taken in a premeditated and pre-planned fashion. One woman said to us, "We no longer live in the world with the rest of you." They live in a limbo, waiting and waiting every second in eternity. So we listened to what the government said, what the soldiers said, what the families said. We want to tell everyone that we are supplying Israel with everything that they need to defend themselves against this brutal act of terror. And we wanted to show bipartisan support for the only democracy in the Middle East. And again, standing up in the face of terror, wherever it is, we need to stand tall and we need to stand strong, and we will support the state of Israel.
There is a tremendous sympathy for the plight of Palestinians in this country and around the world. And when stories like the hospital explosion come out, there was, among many people, a very quick reflexive reaction, assuming it was Israel that did it. American intelligence has shown that it was not. The Columbia Journalism Review today summarized just some of the other kinds of misinformation that people are being subjected to, primarily on Twitter. It said a document appearing to show that the Biden administration gave Israel $8 billion in funding turned out to have been doctored. Video footage that said that some said showed a Hamas soldier shooting down an Israeli helicopter was from a video game. A report on mass desertions from the Israeli Defense Forces was said to have come from an Israeli TV station which shut down in 2019. A video of a young boy lying in a pool of blood surrounded by men in Israeli military fatigues was offered as evidence of brutality, but in reality was a behind-the-scenes shot from a Palestinian movie. Senator Rosen, your constituents are subject to this flow of misinformation along with real information that informs their sympathies for the plight of people stuck in Gaza now. What would you say to them about what the United States can do now for the people of Gaza?
Well, first of all, I think, Lawrence, you're exactly right. The media has become a war-fighting domain for people like Vladimir Putin and terrorist organizations like Hamas, fully backed by Iran. So what we have to do is keep cooler heads. We have to understand that Israel, allies and partners around the world, we want to be sure that we give Israel the supplies that she can defend herself against these brutal acts of terror. We want to be sure we do everything we can to rescue those hostages. Some of them are Americans, like I said, children, handicapped individuals, special needs children, Holocaust survivors, and we must be sure to get that humanitarian aid into the people who need it. Just like Congressman Goldman said, we have to be sure that it's going there and not being siphoned off to the terrorists who use it against the state of Israel. And so what I want to tell my constituents and everyone is to take a moment, take a breath before you believe what you see, and look at your trusted news sources. Try to be sure that you understand the gravity of what's going on and that we must stand up to terror in all forms.
Of course, Hamas could take a big step in a humanitarian direction by releasing all of the hostages immediately, but there are no outside observers who ever expect rational or humanitarian action to be taken by Hamas. That expectation does land on Israel in this situation. And Israel going forward is obviously going to have to be extremely careful about both the perception and the reality of the humanitarian situation in Gaza.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right there. And what we have to do is to think about how we negotiate or how we go in to get these hostages back to their loved ones. And so I can tell you that Israel, along with allies and partners, are trying to figure out the best way for us to do this, because it's important. This is against every single rule of law. You don't premeditate, pre-plan. It's been publicly reported. The documentation, you've seen it, you've reported on it here. This brutality was premeditated, and they executed it even better than they thought they would. Unfortunately, there are hundreds of human, innocent lives at stake here. I've put a resolution in the House, which is bipartisan, calling on Hamas to release these innocent hostages, that the American government stands strong against terror, and that we're going to work with every channel we can to get them out safely to their loved ones.
This is what President Biden said tonight about the ultimate solution for the people of Gaza, which is of course, the two-state solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yesterday, in discussions with the leaders of Israel and Egypt, I secured an agreement for the first shipment of humanitarian assistance from the United Nations to Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Hamas does not divert or steal these shipments. We're going to provide an opening for sustained delivery of life-saving humanitarian assistance for the Palestinians. As I said in Israel, as hard as it is, we cannot give up on peace. We cannot give up on a two-state solution. Israel and Palestinians equally deserve to live in safety, dignity, and peace.
Senator, that's 2 days in a row, President Biden talking about the two-state solution.
Yeah, and I think he's exactly right. We have to take this moment, and we have to use it as an inflection point. We have to be sure we deliver this humanitarian aid, that it goes to the innocent Palestinians in Gaza that are being taken advantage of and terrorized, frankly, by Hamas as well. And so what we need to do with our partners in the region, they all are worried about Iran and its proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, whomever they are. We need to stand and move forward towards normalization in the region, towards peace and a two-state solution. This is the path forward. And frankly, I believe that Iran and Hamas, they want to thwart that at every single turn. And this is why they took this moment to we've begun to make strides in normalization in the region with things like the Abraham Accords and others. And so we can't succumb to their terror. We need to bond together, figure out a way where we move forward, fighting against terrorism and thinking about our shared prosperity and values and protection for people all around the world.
A start would be release the hostages. Senator Jackie Rosen, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And coming up, Yale history professor Timothy Snyder will join us later in the hour with his reaction to President Biden's address to the nation tonight about what the president called an inflection point in history. But first, Donald Trump lost a teammate and a criminal co-defendant today when his lying lawyer, Sidney Powell, pleaded guilty in Georgia. That's next with Andrew Weissman.
What we are really dealing with here and uncovering more by the day is the massive influence of communist money through Venezuela, Cuba, and the interference with our elections here in the United States. The Dominion voting systems, the Smartmatic technology software, And the software that goes in other computerized voting systems here as well, not just Dominion, were created in Venezuela at the direction of Hugo Chavez to make sure he never lost an election.
She was obviously lying, which she admitted today in a Georgia courtroom with one word: guilty.
Ms. Powell, can you please raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this matter currently before the court shall be the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
How old are you, ma'am?
Oh, gosh. 68, despite my astonishingly youthful countenance.
Are you able to read, write, and understand the English language?
Yes,
Ms. Powell, do you understand the charges that are against you here today?
I do.
Ms. Powell, I've been handed a document that's titled a plea of guilty form. Is this your signature as well on the second page?
Yes.
Do you understand that the recommendation being made to the court as to this accusation on counts 1 through 6 that you be sentenced to 12 months of probation to run consecutive with one another?
I do.
Do you understand that the state is asking that a $6,000 fine be imposed, a restitution of $2,700 be paid to the state of Georgia, an apology letter be written to the citizens of the state of Georgia, that you truthfully testify at all hearings and proceedings and trials involving the co-defendants in this matter, and that you have no communication with co-defendants, media, or witnesses until this case has been completely closed against all defendants?
I do.
Do you understand that you waive any and all defenses, including mental health defenses, by entering this guilty plea?
Yes.
How do you plead to the 6 counts of conspiracy to commit intentional interference with performance of election duties?
Guilty.
The defendant, Sidney Powell, along with several co-conspirators, entered into a conspiracy to intervene with the performance of election duties of co-defendant Misty Hampton, also known as Emily Misty Hayes. At all times relevant to the conspiracy, Misty Hampton was the elections director for Coffee County, Georgia, and was subject to all duties imposed by Chapter 2 of Title 21 of OCGA. The purpose of the conspiracy was to use Misty Hampton's position to unlawfully access secure elections machines in Coffee County, Georgia. The restitution will go to the Secretary of State for the cost that was incurred for having to replace the equipment.
And are you pleading guilty today because you agree that there is a sufficient factual basis, that there are enough facts that support this plea of guilty?
I do.
You're to testify truthfully against any and all co-defendants in this matter at any upcoming proceedings. You are not to have any communication with any witness, any co-defendant, or any member of the media concerning the facts or circumstances of this case.
Joining us now is Andrew Weissmann, former FBI General Counsel and former Chief of the Criminal Division, the Eastern District of New York. He is a professor of practice at NYU Law School and MSNBC legal analyst and co-host of the Prosecuting Donald Trump podcast. Also with us, Gwen Keys, former District Attorney of DeKalb County, Georgia. Andrew, we just heard the judge and the prosecutor say to Sidney Powell, you are to testify truthfully against any and all defendants in the matter at any upcoming proceedings. That seems to be the key line of the day.
That is the key line, and that is also the key issue that we don't yet know exactly how this is going to play out. There's no question that today was a monumental day in terms of a defendant who has been charged admitting that with respect to the Coffee County part of the charges, she is guilty. This is the second defendant that has been charged by Fani Willis's grand jury who has admitted that part of the scheme. So that is all on the plus side. What we don't know is whether her truthful testimony is going to implicate others apart from that scheme, such as Donald Trump, of course, or whether she is going to be saying things like, yes, I wanted to get access to the Coffee County machines because I thought there was fraud in the election. And we were just trying to find that fraud, as opposed to, I think, with the reality that's been charged is that she wanted to get access so that she could lie about what was found there, just to continue fomenting the myth that there was fraud in the election. And I think that's really going to be the key, is what is her truthful testimony going to be? If it is not actually sort of the keys to the kingdom with respect to Donald Trump, then I think later people might look at this and say a misdemeanor, no jail time plea is too lenient given what Sidney Powell did. On the other hand, if she really has the goods on Donald Trump and others, this was a really fantastic deal by the DA, and it will pay great dividends in the future.
Just 3 weeks ago, Sidney Powell's lawyer filed a motion to dismiss, saying 3 weeks ago, there is no evidence Ms. Powell had any involvement in any of this, and goes on to say there is no such evidence. And we just heard her plead guilty to that evidence 3 weeks later, which should be a tutorial in how to read criminal defense lawyers' briefs in these cases.
Well, and we said all along that once the defense teams started filing motions and decisions were made on those motions, we would get to the point where defendants would then decide whether they wanted to take the risk and go in front of a jury and risk conviction on felonies where you could get substantial jail time, or possibly consider lesser deals with the prosecutor. And as I recall, those various motions that were filed 3 weeks ago were decided against Ms. Powell by the judge. And so now you start to see how those judicial decisions result in various follow-on decisions by the defendants.
Andrew, it seems to me that at this stage, it's in the district attorney's interest to try to lure more guilty pleas with what seems like a pretty nice deal to plead to. No jail time whatsoever. It seems that part of the package could be part of trying to attract other guilty pleas.
It could be, but typically, as Gwen knows, there usually is an advantage to the person who comes in early and fast. And as you wait, the deals tend to get better in terms of the government side, and worse on the defense side. So it's possible that similar deals will happen, but I think that it gets more and more unlikely. If you, for instance, are charged, as others are, in the Coffee County scheme, this was a very bad day. You have two defendants who have pled guilty who are willing to testify. That case is getting stronger and stronger. So there will be a lot more pressure on them. I would not be surprised to see those people plead guilty. The issue will be whether Fani Willis's strategy, which is a very good one, which is to charge big because good things happen, which is we see people cooperating, whether we'll see these kinds of pleas happening in the parts of the case outside of the Coffee County part of the scheme.
Well, we have to squeeze in a commercial break here, but when we come back, Sidney Powell is in Jack Smith's Washington, D.C. indictment against Donald Trump. She is co-conspirator 3. After this break, we're going to find out what happens to co-conspirator 3 in that case. We'll be right back. Jack Smith's indictment of Donald Trump for crimes leading up to and on January 6th identifies co-conspirator 3 this way. Co-conspirator 3, an attorney whose unfounded claims of election fraud the defendant privately acknowledged to others sounded crazy. Nonetheless, the defendant embraced and publicly amplified co-conspirator 3's disinformation. Gwen Keyes, co-conspirator 3 has now pleaded guilty in Georgia. Is it likely that District Attorney Willis has had some communication with Jack Smith about this guilty plea?
I would guess possibly, or at least somebody in her office. I think the real question is whether Ms. Powell's attorney had conversations with Jack Smith. Certainly, I would assume that any defense attorney would look at this as a global issue rather than just pleading different parts. And I can't believe that he would have his client go under oath admitting guilt in a state case when there's still a risk of an indictment in the federal case. So I'm assuming there had to be coordination, at least on the defense side.
So, Andrew, so the backstage scenario there is, Fani Willis makes an offer. There's an offer on a guilty plea, and the criminal defense lawyer calls up Jack Smith and says, hey, I've got an offer down here. Can you give me something up there that will cover everything?
So I completely agree with Gwen that the defense will have tried to do that, because just imagine a scenario where Sidney Powell testifies in state court, is required to testify truthfully. If she doesn't, she risks going to jail in state court. But everything she says in state court can be used against her in federal court. Those are still admissions. So you would definitely want to try to do this globally. But one of the things that we know from the hearing today is that there is no agreement with the federal government, because that was something that was asked, and it's a standard thing that's asked by the judge, which is, are there any and all agreements? Have they been put forth today? Is there anything outside of the plea agreement that has caused you to plead guilty? And she said, no, everything is in writing and here. So that suggests to me there is no certainly hard and fast agreement with Jack Smith, because I think that normally you would see a federal agreement, some kind of plea agreement, or even just an agreement that says there is an agreement not to charge her if she is truthful, and that we haven't seen that, and I think we would have been alluded to today. So I think that puts Sidney Powell in this very precarious position of potentially having to testify, but knowing her testimony could be used by Jack Smith going forward.
So, Gwen, in the Georgia case, in the Georgia courtroom, will Sidney Powell have potential Fifth Amendment protection against a question that is about a possible violation of federal law?
Well, as Andrew said, she can't avoid the question. She is now under a binding plea agreement to give truthful testimony. And let's remember, the DA's office already has a taped statement from her that she proffered prior to this deal going forward. So if she changes her testimony from that, then the DA would be able to impeach her with her prior video testimony. So to Andrew's point, this is a very thin line, and it'll be interesting to see how things proceed at the federal level, which is, again, why I can't imagine that was not considered as part of this. Even if the final decision was left open, I'm assuming there had to be at least some sort of communication, perhaps one that said, if you cooperate at the state level, then we might consider it favorably at the federal case. But I just can't imagine that side has been left open.
So, Andrew, it's possible we have a criminal defendant here who has pleaded guilty, who's going to be testifying.
सब है दिया, नाम तेरा लिया, तूने सब है दिया, सारे संसार पर है तेरी नजर, ओ शिव शंकर, ओ शिव शंकर, ओ शिव शंकर, ओ शिव शंकर। जब जब देखूं तुझे मैं मन मेरा खिलता है। देखूं मैं जिधर तू दिखे है उधर, देखूं मैं जिधर तू दिखे है उधर। तूने खुशियों से भर दिया है दिल का नगर, ओ शिव शंकर, ओ शिव शंकर, ओ शिव शंकर, ओ शिव शंकर। ओम नमः शिवाय, ओम नमः शिवाय, ओम नमः शिवाय, ओम नमः शिवाय। बिखरा था टूट के पहले तूने मुझको संवारा है। मेरा भोला साथ खड़ा था मैंने जब भी पुकारा है। ना समझ बेखबर तेरी सब पे नजर, ना समझ बेखबर तेरी सब पे नजर। संग तू है खड़ा तो है कैसा डर, ओ शिव शंकर, 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 ओ शिव शंकर।